The heat of a summer afternoon bore down on the quiet suburban town of Ridgewood, known for its picturesque streets and whispered tensions. Officer Clayton Hayes, a long serving member of the Ridgewood Police Department, leaned against his patrol car, sunglasses reflecting the blinding sunlight. He exuded authority and arrogance, his chest puffed up as he surveyed the neighborhood. Clayton was respected by his peers, but feared by others, particularly by the minority communities in Ridgewood, who had seen their share of unwarranted stops and sneering remarks. On this particular day, however, his life was about to collide with something far greater than he could anticipate. Janelle Carter, a confident and sharp 28-year-old black woman, walked briskly out of a local store, carrying a small paper bag. Her crisp white blouse and tailored navy trousers gave her a polished professional appearance, but her casual stride masked her true identity. She was no ordinary shopper. She was an undercover FBI agent on a covert operation involving a deep-rooted criminal syndicate that had infiltrated Ridgewood. As Janelle crossed the parking lot toward her car, Clayton's gaze locked on her. Something about her calm demeanor and self-assured stride irked him. To him, she looked out of place. Without hesitation, he approached her. "Hey, you, stop right there," Clayton barked, hand resting on the holster of his gun. Janelle paused mid-step, her instincts instantly alert. She turned to face him, her voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem, officer?" "What are you doing here?" Clayton asked, his tone dripping with condescension. "You look like you're casing the place." Janelle arched an eyebrow. "Casing? I just left the grocery store." She held up her bag. "Is shopping a crime now?" Clayton scoffed, stepping closer. "Don't get smart with me. Let me see some ID." Janelle hesitated, weighing her options. She couldn't blow her cover, not now, not when she was so close to cracking the syndicate's network. But complying with Clayton's demands could escalate the situation. His demeanor suggested he was more interested in asserting power than ensuring justice. "Officer," she began carefully, "I don't believe I've done anything to warrant this level of scrutiny." Clayton's face darkened. "Oh, so now you're telling me how to do my job?" He grabbed her arm roughly, forcing her to drop the bag. A loaf of bread and a small bottle of milk rolled onto the pavement. "I said, let me see your ID." People nearby stopped to stare, some recording the interaction on their phones. Janelle bit back her anger, her training kicking in. "I suggest you let go of my arm," she said, her voice low but commanding. "Or what?" Clayton sneered. "You're going to call for backup? Newsflash, sweetheart, you're in my town." The situation had escalated far beyond reason, and Janelle knew she had no choice. Reaching into her pocket slowly, she pulled out her badge and ID. She held it up to Clayton, her eyes locking onto his with quiet defiance. The blood drained from Clayton's face as he read the words, "Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Janelle Carter." Silence fell over the parking lot. Clayton's grip loosened, and he stumbled back, his confidence evaporating. But the damage was done. The bystanders, now emboldened, began murmuring, their phones still recording. "Next time," Janelle said, her voice steady, "maybe think twice before profiling someone based on the color of their skin." Clayton opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Janelle turned and walked away, leaving the officer humiliated and exposed. What Clayton didn't realize was that this incident was only the beginning of a much larger storm, a storm that would challenge the systemic biases within Ridgewood and bring Clayton face to face with his own prejudices. It was a hot summer afternoon in Ridgewood, a small suburban town where the air felt heavy with the weight of quiet tension. Officer Clayton Hayes stood by his patrol car, arms crossed over his chest, eyes scanning the familiar strip mall in front of him. He'd been with the Ridgewood Police Department for over a decade, known for his no-nonsense approach and his unshakable sense of superiority. He believed in the us versus them mentality, especially when it came to people who didn't belong in his town. From across the parking lot, Clayton's gaze locked onto Janelle Carter, a woman dressed in a crisp white blouse and navy trousers. She carried a small shopping bag as she walked toward her car. Something about her stood out, but not in a way Clayton could immediately explain. She moved with purpose, too calm, too confident. It bothered him. Without thinking, he approached her. "Hey, stop right there." Janelle paused and turned to face him, an eyebrow raised in quiet curiosity. "Is there something wrong, officer?" Clayton stepped forward, trying to assert control. "What are you doing here? You don't belong in this area." Janelle's voice was steady, unshaken. I'm leaving the store. Is that a crime now? Clayton's jaw tightened, his suspicions growing. Let me see some ID. Janelle took a measured breath. Her instincts told her something was off. This wasn't just a random stop, it was personal. Still, she remained composed. I don't think you have a reason to ask for my ID, she replied calmly. Clayton's eyes narrowed, his hand hovering near his gun holster. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who seemed so out of place in his eyes. He took a step closer, now directly in front of her. I said, show me your ID. Janelle hesitated, considering the risks. She had no choice but to de-escalate this situation, but she couldn't afford to give in to his unreasonable demands either. She reached into her pocket, slowly pulling out her badge and showing it to him. Federal Bureau of Investigation, Special Agent Janelle Carter. The air seemed to still. Clayton's face went pale as he took a step back, visibly shaken by the sight of her FBI credentials. His hand released its grip on her arm, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The crowd around them had started gathering, some recording the interaction on their phones. Clayton's humiliation was now public. Janelle, however, remained calm. She had anticipated that showing her badge would diffuse the situation, but the real damage was already done, both to Clayton's pride and to his credibility. Next time, Janelle said, her voice measured, maybe think twice before assuming someone's a criminal based on how they look. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving Clayton standing in stunned silence. The bystanders, emboldened by what they had witnessed, began to share the video. The caption read, "Racist cop stops black woman. She's an FBI agent." The video spread quickly across social media, generating a wave of outrage and debate. Comments flooded in, many condemning Clayton for his racial profiling, while others praised Janelle for handling the situation with dignity. Clayton stood in his own private turmoil as the video continued to gain traction. He had never considered himself a racist, but his actions had clearly painted a different picture. The world had seen his behavior, and worse, so had his colleagues. He now faced the uncomfortable reality of having to answer for his actions. Meanwhile, Janelle wasn't concerned with the growing attention surrounding the incident. She had a larger mission in mind, an undercover investigation into a criminal syndicate operating in Ridgewood. But the viral video had changed the course of her investigation in ways she hadn't expected. For Clayton, this moment would mark the beginning of an inner reckoning, and for Janelle, it was another reminder that the fight for justice was not always clear-cut. The morning after the viral video, Clayton Hayes couldn't escape the buzz. His phone rang nonstop. Messages, calls, and social media notifications bombarded him with accusations. The video of him humiliating Janelle Carter had quickly become the top trending story in Ridgewood. It was a nightmare unfolding in real time. Clayton had prided himself on his reputation in the department. He wasn't a bad cop. At least, he didn't think he was. But the video painted a different story. People now saw him as a racist officer who had unjustly targeted a woman based on her appearance. His heart sank as he read through comments that ranged from mockery to outright condemnation. "Hayes, we need to talk. My office, ASAP." The message from Captain Laura Monroe hit him like a punch. Clayton knew what this meant. He had been suspended, pending an internal investigation. His career was teetering on the edge, and he had no idea how to salvage it. The investigation into his actions was just the beginning. Rumors of deeper corruption within the department were starting to surface. Was he just the scapegoat, or was there more to this than he realized? Meanwhile, Janelle Carter was at the federal office preparing for the next phase of her undercover operation. She knew the viral video would complicate things. She had hoped to keep a low profile, but now she was at the center of a public storm. Janelle met with Special Agent Marcus Reed to discuss the fallout. "The video's everywhere. People are calling me a hero. Others are defending Clayton," she said, looking over her shoulder at the flood of comments online. Marcus nodded. "The public opinion is split, but this isn't just about Clayton. We need to focus on the bigger picture. The syndicate we're investigating has connections to the Ridgewood PD. We've got a window to go deeper, but we need to stay cautious." Janelle took a breath. "I'm ready. This video is just the beginning. We need to find out who else is involved." Marcus continued. "It's not just about the syndicate. Clayton's stop might have exposed corruption in the department. The sooner we figure out who's really behind all this, the better. Janelle's mind raced. If Clayton was part of a bigger web of corruption, it would complicate everything. But she had come too far to back down now. Back at the police department, Clayton sat in Captain Monroe's office, bracing for the worst. Monroe's face was stern as she looked at him. This is bad, Hayes. I'm reading the comments, the backlash. It's all on you. And it's not just about the stop with Janelle. We've got reports of corruption, possible ties to organized crime. Clayton's stomach tightened. I didn't know she was FBI. I was just doing my job. You have to believe me. Monroe looked unimpressed. I'm not sure what you were thinking, but now Internal Affairs is investigating everything. And if there's any truth to these corruption rumors, you'll be swept up in it, whether you're involved or not. Clayton tried to argue, but the reality was sinking in. His career was on the line. This wasn't just about a mistaken stop. It was about something much deeper. That night, Clayton sat alone in his apartment, replaying the events in his head. He couldn't escape the feeling that his life had changed forever. Had his actions been part of a larger problem in the department? He had always thought of himself as an honest cop, but now he wasn't so sure. Across town, Janelle was preparing for her next move. The attention surrounding the video had already put the department under a microscope. This wasn't just about proving Clayton's bias. It was about exposing a system that had allowed corruption to fester in silence. As the investigation into Clayton Hayes continued, Janelle's focus remained on the larger task at hand, infiltrating the criminal syndicate. She knew the stakes had just risen significantly. Clayton Hayes couldn't escape the consequences. The video of his confrontation with Janelle had gone viral, and now he was suspended. He walked into the Ridgewood Police Department, the weight of the situation heavy on his shoulders. As he cleared out his desk, his partner, Officer Ben Torres, approached him. You holding up okay? Ben asked. Clayton sighed. I didn't think it would blow up like this. I didn't know she was FBI. But now, things are getting worse. Ben lowered his voice. You've heard the rumors, right? Some of the higher-ups in the department? There's talk of corruption. The syndicate may have deeper ties to Ridgewood PD than we thought. Clayton froze. What are you saying? Ben hesitated. You need to be careful, man. People are talking. Meanwhile, Janelle was meeting with Special Agent Marcus Reed. The viral video had added complications to her already risky undercover mission. The video's causing a stir, Marcus said. But we can't let it sidetrack us. We need to find out who's really involved in the syndicate. Clayton's a small piece, but this could open up something bigger. Janelle nodded. I'm in. We can't let the video distract us. There's too much at stake. Back at the bar later that evening, Clayton met with Mike Slick Donovan, an old contact who had left the force after a scandal. Clayton needed answers, and Mike was the one who might have them. People are talking, Hayes, Mike said. There's a lot more going on than just a bad stop with Carter. If you really want to know, you'll have to dig deeper. Clayton leaned in. Who's involved? What's really going on? Mike paused, then leaned closer. I'll tell you, but you need to be careful. There are people in this town who will stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden. Janelle, meanwhile, received a cryptic message. Watch your back. Her heart raced. Was it from someone inside the department? Or someone with ties to the syndicate? Marcus saw her reaction. Stay sharp. This is getting more dangerous by the minute. As the day ended, both Clayton and Janelle were realizing that their paths, though once separate, were now on a collision course. The morning after receiving the warning, Janelle Carter was on edge. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The text had been short, but it carried a weight she couldn't ignore. Watch your back. She sat in the FBI office reviewing the latest intel on the syndicate. Her focus was sharp, but the unsettling message lingered. As she stared at the files on her desk, her phone buzzed again, this time with a call from Special Agent Marcus Reed. We need to meet, Marcus said, his voice tense. The situation just escalated. Internal Affairs is digging into Clayton's past, and it looks like there's more going on in Ridgewood PD than we thought. Janelle nodded. I've been hearing the same. There are too many unanswered questions. We need to be careful, but we can't pull back now. Marcus continued. Exactly. But the warning you got? It's not just random. Someone's trying to send a message. Be careful who you trust from here on out. Janelle agreed, the weight of their investigation pressing down on her. I'll meet you in an hour. We need to get ahead of this before it spirals out of control. Meanwhile, Clayton sat in his car outside a small cafe, debating his next move. The conversation with Mike Donovan still echoed in his mind. The officer had hinted at something much darker lurking within the department. Was it just a few bad apples, or had corruption spread too deep to root out? He had to know more. With his suspension still in place, Clayton was essentially a civilian now, no longer bound by department rules. He wasn't sure if that made him freer or more vulnerable. But if the syndicate had ties to his department, Clayton couldn't just sit by and wait for someone else to uncover the truth. As he entered the cafe, he spotted his contact, a former informant sitting at a corner booth. His contact looked around nervously, then waved Clayton over. "You're really going through with this, huh?" Clayton sat down, ignoring the apprehension in his gut. "I have no choice. There's more to this than I thought. People inside my department are involved in something big. I need to know who they are." The informant leaned in closer. "I've heard names, a few officers, even some higher-ups. But it's not just about the department. There's someone outside the force pulling the strings. Someone you won't expect." Clayton's pulse quickened. "Who?" The informant hesitated. "I can't give you a name yet, but it's bigger than you think. And if you want to survive this, you need to be careful. These people play dirty." Back at the FBI office, Janelle was reviewing a list of potential suspects when her phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. Stop before it's too late." Her stomach churned. It was the second warning she had received. She quickly forwarded the message to Marcus. His response came immediately. "We need to talk. Meet me in an hour." Janelle felt the urgency. Someone knew exactly what she was up to. If Clayton's investigation was leading to something bigger, it was clear that whoever was behind it was now aware of her involvement. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about survival. As the day wore on, Clayton's investigation into the syndicate led him to one chilling conclusion. Someone within the department was directly involved with the criminal organization. The puzzle pieces were starting to fit together, but the danger was growing with each step. For Janelle, the warnings weren't just threats. They were real. She knew she was close to uncovering something that would change everything. But she also knew that if she wasn't careful, she could be the next target. Clayton Hayes sat in his car, staring at the dimly lit warehouse in front of him. His meeting with Mike "Slick" Donovan was his only lead, and he wasn't sure who else to trust. If the department was as deep in corruption as Mike suggested, Clayton was in over his head. Inside the warehouse, Mike handed him a pile of documents. "This is everything I've got. Names, connections, photos of officers, and some key players you've never met. But there's someone at the top, controlling it all." Clayton sifted through the papers. "Who? Who's behind all of this?" Mike leaned in. "I can't give you a name just yet, but it's someone you trust, someone in the department." The words hit like a punch. "I need to find them. I need to know who's pulling the strings." Mike's face grew serious. "You're already on their radar. If you keep digging, you might not make it out." Meanwhile, Janelle Carter was meeting with Special Agent Marcus Reed. The warning text from the mysterious sender weighed heavily on her mind. "We're getting closer to the truth," Janelle said, her voice tight. "But someone's onto us. The pressure is building." Marcus nodded. "Keep pushing. But be careful. Clayton's just one piece. We need to find the people who are really running things." That evening, Janelle met her informant at a warehouse, unaware that Clayton had just left. The air was thick with tension. "You need to be careful," the informant warned. "The syndicate knows you're onto them, and there's someone in the department, someone you trust, who's been feeding them information." Janelle's stomach dropped. "Who?" The informant's voice shook. "I don't know, but they're dangerous. If you keep going, you'll be in more trouble than you think." Janelle stood up. "I can't stop now. I need to know who's behind this." Clayton Hayes couldn't stop thinking about what Mike had said. Someone in the department was working with the syndicate, someone he trusted. The idea twisted in his mind, gnawing at him. He had to know who it was, but the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. As he drove home, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being followed. Every car seemed to linger too long behind him. He checked the rearview mirror again. Nothing. But the sensation wouldn't go away. He wasn't alone. Meanwhile, Janelle's phone buzzed again. Another cryptic message. You're too close. Back off. She clenched her fists, anger rising. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare her, they were trying to stop her. But she wasn't backing down. Janelle quickly called Marcus. I got another message. They're escalating. This isn't just about Clayton anymore. It's about stopping us. Marcus's voice was urgent. You need to stay in control. We can't afford to make mistakes now. But we can't back off either. Not until we find out who's behind this. The next day, Clayton met with a fellow officer, someone he hadn't seen in months. They used to be close, but things had changed. The officer had been quiet, distant lately, and Clayton suspected he knew more than he was letting on. What's going on? Clayton asked, his tone low. People are talking. What aren't you telling me? The officer hesitated. I don't know who you can trust anymore. Everything's falling apart. But I'll tell you this, there are eyes everywhere. Watch your back. Janelle, still processing the new message, met with her informant again. This time, the meeting felt different, more urgent. I don't have much time, the informant said. The department's not just corrupted, it's controlled. Someone at the top has made sure no one can stop them. Janelle's heart pounded. Who? The informant's eyes darted nervously. I don't know, but they're powerful, and they're watching you. Clayton sat at a diner, sipping his coffee as he stared at the stack of documents Mike had given him. Every name, every connection seemed to lead back to a dead end. The deeper he went, the more questions he had. The truth was slipping through his fingers, and he wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I warned you. You're digging too deep. Clayton's heart raced. He glanced around, checking for any sign of someone watching him. Nothing. But the warning was clear. Someone wanted him to stop. And whoever it was wasn't afraid to make their intentions known. Janelle, meanwhile, was growing more frustrated by the day. The investigation was taking too long, and every lead seemed to circle back to the same conclusion. They were being watched. She'd been trying to reach out to her informant for days, but they were becoming increasingly difficult to contact. Her phone rang. Marcus's name flashed across the screen. We've got a problem, Marcus said when she picked up. Clayton's been digging into the department, and now he's on the radar. We need to bring him in before he gets too far. Janelle's pulse quickened. What do you mean? He's already involved. He knows too much. Exactly, Marcus said. If we bring him in, we might be able to get him to trust us. Otherwise, we risk losing him and the whole investigation. Janelle shook her head. He's too far gone. He won't trust us. Not now. Back at Clayton's apartment, he found a new note slipped under his door. Stop. Or else. The message was short, but it sent a chill down his spine. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare him anymore. They were making threats. He shoved the note in his pocket, heading out the door. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became. The syndicate wasn't just a group of criminals. It had ties deep within the department. And if he didn't uncover the mastermind behind it all, there would be no stopping them. As he walked toward his car, a shadow passed by. He spun around, but there was no one there, just the echo of his own footsteps. Janelle couldn't shake the feeling that she was being followed. She checked her rearview mirror again, but the car behind her was too far back to make out. She wasn't sure if it was her imagination or if she was actually being watched. She turned off the main road and into an alley, parking in a hidden spot. She needed to think. There was too much at stake, and the walls were closing in. Her phone buzzed again. You're on your own. Janelle's heart sank. Was it from the informant? Or was it from someone else, someone trying to tell her to back off? Either way, she knew she couldn't stop now. She was too close to the truth. The tension in Ridgewood was palpable. Clayton and Janelle were getting closer to the same answers. But they didn't know it yet. Both were being watched, both were getting deeper into a dangerous game, and both were running out of time. Clayton couldn't shake the feeling that someone was closing in on him. He had spent the last few days piecing together everything he could, but now his apartment felt like a cage. His documents were no longer where he had left them, and the open window made it clear someone had been inside. The silence was thick, unnerving. Clayton sat down at his desk, his hands trembling as he sifted through the papers. Whoever was behind this wasn't playing games anymore. They were making their move. His phone buzzed. A new text. "You've gone too far. Stop before it's too late." Clayton's heart raced. He couldn't stop now, but the warnings were growing harder to ignore. Meanwhile, Janelle's anxiety was mounting. She was tracking every move Clayton made, trying to stay one step ahead, but every time she thought she was close, another roadblock appeared. Her informant had gone silent, and she was starting to wonder if she was being played. Marcus had been pushing her to stay on track, but she could feel the pressure mounting. "We can't afford to lose Clayton," he insisted. "He's too valuable. If he finds the truth, we all win. But if he disappears—" "I know," Janelle cut him off. "I'm doing everything I can, but it feels like we're the ones being hunted." Back at Clayton's apartment, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. He had to meet with someone he could trust. His old partner, Officer Samuel Holt, had reached out. Holt had always been reliable, but Clayton could sense something had changed. Holt was nervous, almost paranoid. When Clayton stepped into the street, a car slowed beside him. The passenger window rolled down, revealing Holt's tense face. "Get in," Holt said quickly. Clayton hesitated, but then opened the door. "What's going on?" "You don't understand what you're getting into," Holt said, voice low. "This thing is bigger than you think. People are watching you, and they won't stop until you're gone." Clayton's mind raced. Who's behind this? Who's pulling the strings? Holt glanced around nervously. "I can't say right now. Meet me at the old precinct. It's the only place we're safe." Janelle, still watching from a distance, saw Clayton get into the car with Holt. Her gut twisted. She knew something wasn't right. She had been tracking Clayton's movements for days, but now he was out of reach. She couldn't lose him. Not now. She gripped the wheel tightly as she followed them, her eyes scanning the road ahead. She wasn't sure if Clayton was being led into a trap or if he was finally getting the answers they both needed. But one thing was clear. Whatever happened next, it was a point of no return. Clayton couldn't stop thinking about Holt's warning. "This is bigger than you think." The words echoed in his head as he sat in the back of Holt's car. The old precinct was only a few minutes away, but each second felt like an eternity. His heart raced, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. Holt's eyes darted nervously between the rearview mirror and the road ahead. "I don't know who you can trust anymore. People inside, people you've worked with, they're all in on this. The department's compromised, Clayton. It's not just the syndicate, it's the system." The words hit Clayton like a punch. He had suspected it for a while, but hearing it confirmed felt like the ground shifting beneath his feet. "Then why are you helping me?" Clayton asked, his voice tight with suspicion. "I'm not," Holt said quickly. "I'm trying to save you, but if we don't get out of here, we're both dead." The car pulled up to the old precinct, a crumbling building on the edge of town. It had been abandoned for years, but Clayton knew it like the back of his hand. They both stepped out into the cold night air, their footsteps echoing on the cracked concrete. Janelle was watching from a distance, parked at the edge of the block. She had followed Clayton's every move, but now as he entered the building with Holt, she felt the sense of urgency she had been dreading. Was this a trap? She wasn't sure, but she knew she couldn't lose them. Not now. She hesitated, her hand on the door handle. If Clayton was going to find the truth tonight, so was she. But if it was a trap, she was already too deep to back out. Janelle made up her mind. She would follow them in, stay hidden, and figure out what was really going on. Inside the precinct, Clayton and Holt moved quickly, glancing over their shoulders. The place was dark and silent. The only sounds the distant hum of the streetlights and their own footsteps. "Where are we going?" Clayton whispered, his voice low. "The basement," Holt replied, leading him down a narrow corridor. "There's something you need to see, something that'll change everything." When they reached the door at the end of the hall, Holt hesitated, glancing nervously at Clayton. "You're not going to like what's in there." Clayton felt a pit form in his stomach. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. Holt pushed open the door, revealing a small, dimly lit room. On the far wall were monitors, each displaying different parts of the city. Clayton recognized a few of the faces on the screens, officers, informants, and people he had worked with. "This is it," Holt said, his voice barely above a whisper. The surveillance operation. They've been watching everyone. The syndicate, the department, the people they control. It's all connected. Clayton's breath caught in his throat as he stepped closer to the monitors. He knew most of these people. Some were his colleagues, others were suspects. But one face stood out. His own. Janelle, still outside, watched from the shadows as Clayton and Holt disappeared into the building. Her gut was telling her this was the moment. She had to get in there. She quickly slipped through the side entrance and crept down the hallway toward the basement. The air felt thick with tension, and every step made her heart pound louder. Clayton was frozen, staring at the screen. His image was right there, broadcasted for the world to see. He couldn't understand it. Why were they watching him? Had he been a target all along? Holt's voice broke the silence. You've been under surveillance for months. They've been tracking everything. Every step, every move you've made. And it's not just you. Clayton turned to face Holt, his fists clenched. Who else? Everyone, Holt said, his face pale. This isn't just about the syndicate. It's about controlling everything. The department, the city, all of it. Clayton stared at the monitors, his mind racing. His face was right there, along with a dozen others, all under constant surveillance. He couldn't wrap his head around it. How had they been able to keep track of him for so long? And why? Holt's words echoed in his mind. It's not just you. Everyone's a target. It didn't make sense. They were watching everyone in the department, from the highest ranks to the lowest officers. But why? This, Clayton began, his voice shaky. This is bigger than just a few dirty cops, isn't it? Holt nodded grimly. Much bigger. This is about control. The syndicate, the department, they've infiltrated everything, and they'll stop at nothing to keep it all under their thumb. Clayton's stomach churned. So, who's behind it? Who's really pulling the strings? I wish I could tell you, Holt said, his voice filled with regret. But I don't know either. They keep everything too well hidden. All I know is that the higher you go, the more dangerous it gets. Clayton's frustration flared. Then why are we even here? If you don't know who they are, then what's the point? We're here to find out, Holt replied. This room, the surveillance, it's part of the puzzle, but there's more. There's a place, a location that ties everything together. If we get there, we might just have a chance to stop it. Before Clayton could respond, a noise echoed through the building. Footsteps. Someone else was here. Janelle's heart raced as she moved through the building, her eyes scanning every shadow. She had been following Clayton's every move, but now that she was inside, things felt different. The air was thick with danger, and the deeper she went, the more the sense of being watched grew stronger. She reached the basement door and quietly turned the handle. The door creaked open, and Janelle slipped inside, keeping to the shadows. She needed to get close without being seen. The sounds of Clayton and Holt's conversation grew louder as she approached. They were talking about the surveillance, the bigger plan, and a mysterious location. Janelle's pulse quickened. This was it, the break they had been waiting for. She moved closer, pressing her back against the cold wall. She could barely hear their words, but enough was clear. They knew something, something crucial. If she could just get closer, she might learn everything she needed. Back in the basement, Clayton was tense, his eyes scanning the monitors. Whoever was behind this was too powerful, too organized. He had no idea what he was really up against. What now? He asked, his voice low. Holt didn't answer immediately. He was watching the door, his face betraying his growing anxiety. Then, almost in a whisper, he said, "We need to go now. We're not alone." Clayton's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "Someone's here. They've found us." Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered. The building seemed to come alive with movement. Clayton could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. The tension was unbearable. Holt grabbed Clayton's arm. "We need to leave, now." But before they could make a move, the basement door burst open and a figure stepped inside. It was Janelle. The basement door slammed open with a deafening bang, and Clayton's body tensed, every muscle ready for a fight. But as his eyes locked on the figure in the doorway, his breath caught. It was Janelle. Her face was shadowed, but there was no mistaking her presence. Clayton could feel his pulse pounding in his ears. She had been following him. She'd been right behind him the whole time, but now everything had changed. He had to know. Was she an ally, or was she part of the problem? Janelle stepped into the room, her hand instinctively reaching for her sidearm. I wasn't sure if I'd make it in time, she said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. She had clearly been listening to their conversation. Clayton's gaze flickered to Holt, who was just as surprised to see her as he was. What the hell is she doing here? Holt muttered under his breath. I had to find out, Janelle said, her eyes flicking between Clayton and Holt. The surveillance, this whole operation. I've been tracking you both. I had to make sure I wasn't missing something. Clayton felt the weight of the moment press down on him. He could feel the walls closing in. The truth was out in the open now, and there was no way to ignore it. What do you want, Janelle? You've been spying on me this whole time? Janelle hesitated, her eyes briefly flicking to Holt. She knew she had to choose her words carefully. I'm trying to stop this, whatever it is. This corruption runs deeper than we thought. I wasn't sure if you were working with the syndicate or not, but now I know. Holt stepped forward, a hand on his gun. You can't trust anyone, Janelle. It's all connected. If you're not careful, you'll end up just like us, trapped. Clayton couldn't keep the frustration out of his voice. Why does it feel like we're all on different sides here? You two are telling me one thing, but I don't know what to believe anymore. Janelle stepped closer, her expression softening. I'm not here to play games, Clayton. I'm here because I believe in the truth. I believe in doing the right thing. But the people behind this, they've got power, and they'll use anything to keep their secrets safe. There was a tense silence in the room, thick with the weight of unspoken words. Clayton took a deep breath, trying to make sense of it all. It was clear that both Janelle and Holt were playing a dangerous game. The line between ally and enemy had become so blurry that Clayton wasn't sure who to trust. Before he could respond, a loud crash echoed through the building. Outside, a group of men in dark uniforms were moving toward the precinct. The sound of boots pounding against the concrete was unmistakable. These were not just cops. They were something far worse. Holt's eyes widened with fear. We're out of time. They've found us. We need to leave. Now. Clayton turned to Janelle. You came here to help, right? You're not part of this. Then prove it. Janelle nodded, but her eyes were sharp. We need to move. We'll talk later. The group moved quickly, rushing down the narrow hallway toward the back exit. Clayton's mind was spinning. Every step felt like it might be their last. He was still trying to figure out who was truly on his side, but there was no time to think about that now. They were in the middle of a war, and the stakes had just gotten higher. As they reached the back door, a voice shouted from the shadows, "Stop right there." Clayton froze. There was no mistaking the authority in the voice. It was a voice he had heard before, a voice he trusted. But it wasn't coming from the shadows. It was Marcus. His face, cold and resolute, emerged from the darkness. Clayton's body went rigid at the sound of Marcus's voice. His heart pounded, the air thick with confusion and suspicion. Marcus had been an ally, or so he thought. But now, standing in the doorway with a cold look on his face, he looked like something else entirely. Marcus? Clayton's voice was hoarse with disbelief. What are you doing here? Marcus stepped into the dim light, his expression unreadable. I'm here to stop you, Clayton. You've gone too far. Holt's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. You better explain yourself, Marcus. Now. Janelle's eyes narrowed, her hand subtly resting on the gun holster at her waist. The tension in the room grew heavier with every passing second. The danger felt imminent, but it wasn't just from the unknown forces outside. It was from Marcus himself. I've tried to protect you, Clayton, but you're digging into something you don't understand, Marcus said, his voice low and controlled. The deeper you go, the more dangerous it becomes. I've warned you. Now it's too late. Clayton felt his pulse quicken, his mind racing. You're one of them, aren't you? The words came out before he could stop them. You're working for the syndicate. Marcus didn't flinch. I'm not working for anyone, he said, his eyes narrowing. I'm doing what needs to be done to keep the peace. What you're doing, what you've been doing, is reckless. You're threatening everything we've built. Holt stepped forward, his voice sharp. Enough of this. We're not backing down. We're getting out of here, and we're going to expose the truth. Marcus smirked, almost pityingly. You don't get it, do you? You're already too late. The truth is already out there, Clayton, but you'll never find it. Not unless you're willing to make the ultimate sacrifice. Janelle spoke up, her voice steady but filled with urgency. What does that mean? What are you really saying, Marcus? Marcus's gaze flicked to Janelle, his eyes cold and calculating. It means that your fight isn't with me. It's with the system, with everything you thought you knew. And right now, I'm the only one who can stop the storm you've started. There was a long silence. Clayton's mind was a blur of conflicting thoughts, and in that silence, everything seemed to freeze. Then, as if on cue, the sound of footsteps echoed from down the hallway. It was too late. The men Marcus had called for were already here. Outside, the building was surrounded. Men in black uniforms with masks were positioned at every exit, blocking any chance of escape. Clayton's stomach sank as the reality set in. This was it. They were trapped. Janelle didn't wait for anyone to tell her what to do. She was already moving, her eyes scanning for an escape route. We can't stay here. We need to find another way out. Marcus seemed almost amused by her attempt. There's no way out, Janelle. It's over. Clayton grabbed her arm, pulling her to the side. We're not giving up. We're getting out, and we're getting the truth out there, whatever it takes. Holt moved toward the back door, eyeing Marcus with distrust. If you're not with us, you're against us, and I don't care which side you're on. Marcus's expression grew colder. You'll regret this, all of you. As if to punctuate his words, the sound of approaching footsteps intensified. They were closing in, tightening their grip on the building. But in that moment, Clayton made a decision. We don't have a choice, he muttered under his breath. He turned to Janelle and Holt. We make our own way. The sound of pounding footsteps grew louder. The men were closing in, but Clayton wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not after everything they had uncovered. The truth was within reach. He could feel it. Janelle nodded, her eyes filled with determination. Let's move. Clayton pushed through the back door, into the darkness beyond. He didn't know what waited for them on the other side, but he knew this was the only chance they had left. The fight was far from over. But now, the stakes had never been higher. The safe house felt too quiet, the kind of silence that made Clayton uneasy. He could feel the weight of the situation settling around him as he surveyed the small, dimly lit room. It wasn't safe here. Not really. They were just buying time, hoping for a chance to figure things out before it was too late. Janelle paced the room, her hand constantly on her gun. Holt sat at the table, his focus on the map in front of him, his expression tight. Clayton noticed how uneasy Holt seemed now, a far cry from the confident man he had once appeared to be. You've been quiet, Clayton said, breaking the tension. What's on your mind, Holt? Holt didn't immediately respond, his gaze shifting from the map to Clayton. We're in deeper than I thought. This isn't just about the syndicate anymore. They're part of something bigger, much bigger. Clayton's stomach sank. What are you saying? Holt's voice dropped lower. There's a network of people running this, people with real power, far more dangerous than the syndicate. Marcus is connected to them. He's not just some rogue agent. He's working for someone. Janelle stiffened. Who? Holt hesitated, his eyes flicking back to the map. I don't know yet, but whoever they are, they control everything. They're pulling strings at the highest levels of government. Clayton's mind raced. This wasn't just about a criminal organization. It was about corruption at the highest levels. They were up against an entire system, not just a syndicate. Janelle's voice cut through the tension. So what do we do now? We're sitting ducks here. We need a plan. We need to find who's behind all this, Holt said. We move at dawn. Clayton knew it wasn't much of a plan, but it was all they had. We don't have time to waste. We go after them, wherever they're hiding. As they prepared to leave, Clayton felt a gnawing sense of dread. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it would get. But they had no choice. The dawn light barely touched the edges of the sky, and yet the group was already moving. Clayton, Janelle, and Holt left the safety of the house without a word, their faces set in grim determination. They had one goal: find the people pulling Marcus's strings and take them down before it was too late. Clayton was tense, his eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes now. Holt led the way, taking them down back alleys and hidden streets, avoiding the main roads where they might be spotted. It was all part of their plan: stay off the grid until they knew exactly what they were up against. Janelle stayed close to Clayton, her hand on her gun, alert to every movement. How do we even know where to start? She asked, voice low but sharp. We've got no leads, no direction. This whole thing's a damn maze. We start with Marcus, Clayton replied, his jaw tight. He's the key. If we find him, we find everything else. They turned a corner into a narrow street that looked deserted. Clayton's instincts told him something wasn't right. He paused, signaling for the others to stop. I don't like this, he muttered. It's too quiet. Holt's eyes darted around, his hand brushing the side of his jacket where his weapon was concealed. We're too exposed. Keep moving. Suddenly, the distant sound of a car engine broke the silence, followed by the unmistakable screech of tires on asphalt. Clayton's heart raced. The enemies were closing in faster than he expected. Stay low, Holt ordered, pushing forward. But it was too late. A black SUV turned the corner, screeching to a halt in front of them. The door flung open, and two armed men stepped out, their guns raised. Clayton's adrenaline kicked in. He grabbed Janelle's arm, pulling her behind a nearby dumpster for cover. Holt was already on the move, darting toward a narrow alleyway between two buildings. The situation was escalating fast. They were cornered, and there was no easy way out. You're not going anywhere, one of the men shouted, aiming his gun at them. Clayton's mind raced as he considered his options. They couldn't fight their way out of this. At least, not without a plan. Holt's voice came through the comms in his earpiece, sharp and clear. Head north. I've got a way out. Janelle looked at Clayton, her expression one of hesitation. You trust him? Right now, we don't have a choice, Clayton replied, pulling her up from behind the dumpster. They dashed toward the alley, the sound of footsteps close behind them. Every step felt like it could be their last. They ran through narrow passageways, their breaths ragged, hearts pounding. Holt had promised them an escape route, but Clayton had no idea where it would lead. He just had to trust that Holt wasn't leading them into another trap. Janelle glanced over at Clayton, her eyes filled with doubt. Do you think we can really get to the bottom of this? I mean, all of this? It's huge. Clayton didn't look at her. He couldn't afford to. I don't know, we don't have a choice. We have to keep going. They rounded another corner, and Clayton finally saw it, an old, abandoned building with boarded-up windows. Holt was standing in front of it, signaling for them to hurry. You two better get in here fast, Holt called. We don't have much time. As they ducked inside, the door slammed shut behind them. The room was dark, but it didn't take long for Holt to find the light switch. Clayton's eyes scanned the space. It was a warehouse of sorts, filled with crates and old furniture. But there was something else. Something hidden. A trapdoor in the floor, half hidden by a stack of crates. This is the exit, Holt said, pointing to the trapdoor. We're heading underground. Stay sharp. They climbed down into the darkness, and Clayton felt a chill run through him. They had no idea where this would lead, but they had to keep moving. Every second counted. The deeper they went, the more the pressure mounted. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. This was their last chance to uncover the truth. Whoever was behind all this, whoever was pulling the strings, they would stop at nothing to keep their secrets safe. Clayton wasn't sure how far they could go, but as they descended further into the unknown, he knew one thing. They couldn't afford to stop now. The narrow underground passage felt suffocating. As Clayton, Janelle, and Holt descended into the depths, the air grew colder, thick with the smell of damp concrete and mildew. The only light came from a flickering bulb above, casting long shadows on the walls. Every sound was amplified, every footstep echoing ominously. Clayton led the way, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. He wasn't sure where they were headed, but he couldn't stop now. He had no choice but to trust Holt, for now. We keep moving, Clayton muttered, his voice low. We can't waste any more time. Janelle, always alert, moved silently behind him, her hand on her weapon. This place feels wrong, too quiet. You sure this is the right place? We don't have another choice, Clayton replied, his voice clipped. If Holt says it's a safe house, we move forward. Holt had been unusually quiet, his face tense as he followed behind them. Clayton could sense the unease in the man, the way his fingers twitched at his side. But Holt was still the only one who seemed to know where they were going. After what felt like hours, they arrived at a thick metal door. Holt approached it and pressed a series of buttons on the keypad beside it. The door groaned open, revealing a set of stairs leading down into more darkness. Janelle's voice was barely a whisper. Are you sure this is safe? Holt didn't answer immediately, his focus fixed on the door as it shut behind them. It's the last place we can go. The stairs seemed to stretch endlessly downward. The deeper they went, the heavier the air felt, as if the weight of their situation was pressing in from all sides. The further they went, the more trapped Clayton felt. He had no idea what they were walking into, but they had no choice but to follow. At the bottom of the stairs, they entered a small room, dimly lit and filled with old equipment. The walls were lined with files and old technology, a stark contrast to the high-tech surveillance systems they were used to. It looked like a place meant for people who needed to disappear. This is it, Holt said, standing near a table covered with papers and maps. This is where we can regroup. Clayton studied the room, his mind racing. And Marcus? What do we do about him? Holt shook his head, looking at the papers in front of him. Marcus isn't the key. The people behind him are, but I don't have a clear lead yet. Janelle wasn't having it. We don't have time for pieces of a puzzle. We need answers now. Holt's jaw clenched. I know, but I can't pull this together without more intel. I'll need time to figure out the connections. Clayton didn't like the idea of waiting. Time is the one thing we don't have. We can't just sit here. He looked at the door, then back at Holt. If we know anything about Marcus, it's that he won't wait. We go after him now. Holt's eyes narrowed. And if we make the wrong move, we'll deal with the fallout, Clayton said firmly. But we can't afford to wait. The room fell silent as Holt weighed their options. There was a long pause, the air thick with tension. Finally, Holt exhaled and nodded. All right, we go after Marcus. But even as the words left his mouth, Clayton knew they were stepping into something much bigger than they could handle. The deeper they went, the more dangerous it became. And they had no idea just how deep the corruption went. The street felt too quiet, and Clayton couldn't shake the sense that something was wrong. Every step they took was met with silence, and the weight of the situation pressed on him. We're moving too slow, Clayton muttered, his eyes scanning the darkened surroundings. Janelle was just as alert, keeping close behind. I've got a bad feeling about this. Holt, leading the way, paused. We're close. Marcus is in that building. Clayton's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the moment they had been waiting for. But as they neared the door, something didn't sit right. It was too quiet. Wait, Clayton hissed, holding them back. Before they could react, the screech of tires pierced the air. A black SUV sped toward them and slammed to a stop. Armed men flooded out, weapons drawn. Get down, Holt shouted as bullets sprayed in their direction. Clayton instinctively pulled Janelle into cover behind a nearby pillar, his mind racing. They were pinned down. Flank them, Holt motioned. They sprinted to the side of the building, bullets ricocheting around them. They reached an alley and took cover for a brief moment, but they knew it wouldn't last. We need to move, Clayton said, voice tense. They dashed through the alley, but as they rounded the corner, one of the gunmen spotted them. Another round of gunfire erupted, forcing them to dive behind more cover. We push forward, Clayton urged, returning fire. There was no time to waste. As they approached the back of the building, Holt signaled them to retreat. The gunmen were closing in, but they couldn't afford to stop. Marcus was still out there. We're not done, Clayton said firmly, disappearing into the shadows with the others. Clayton's nerves were on edge as they approached the safe house. The alley was silent, too silent. He could feel the tension in the air. Something wasn't right. We can't stay here long, Clayton muttered, glancing at Janelle and Holt. They quickly reached a rundown warehouse, and Holt unlocked the side door. This is it, he said, but Clayton didn't feel reassured. As they entered, the door slammed shut behind them. A voice echoed from the shadows. Well, look who finally decided to show up. Clayton's blood ran cold. It was Marcus. Marcus stepped forward, flanked by armed men. You made a mistake coming here, he sneered. Clayton gripped his gun. This ends now. Marcus laughed, cold and cruel. You're out of your league. Before Clayton could react, the men raised their guns. Take them out, Marcus ordered. Clayton dove for cover behind a stack of crates, pulling Janelle and Holt with him. Gunfire erupted, bullets flying around them. They moved quickly, darting between cover as they returned fire. Keep moving, Clayton shouted, aiming for the back door. But Marcus and his men were closing in. We can't outrun them, Holt said. We fight. Clayton nodded. We get to the back exit. They pushed forward, ducking behind boxes and shooting at the gunmen. Clayton's heart pounded in his chest as they neared the door. One of Marcus's men stepped in front of them. Clayton fired, but more were coming. We need to go now, Janelle yelled. They turned toward a small service door. Move, Clayton urged. Gunfire continued to fill the air as they ran. Just as they reached the door, Marcus's voice rang out. Don't let them escape. Janelle yanked the door open and they burst into the night air. The gunfire from behind faded, but they were far from safe. Go, Clayton ordered, and they ran into the alley, but the chase wasn't over. Marcus would be coming for them. The night air was cold as Clayton, Janelle, and Holt sprinted through the alley, their footsteps echoing off the walls. Every second felt like a lifetime, the weight of what had just happened pressing down on Clayton. They'd barely made it out alive. Keep moving, Clayton urged, his voice strained with pain. His side throbbed, and the blood loss was starting to make him dizzy. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Janelle glanced back. We can't outrun them forever. We don't need to outrun them, Clayton said, gritting his teeth. We just need to stay ahead long enough to regroup. They turned a corner, only to stop short. A black SUV sat at the end of the alley, its engine running. Clayton's heart skipped a beat. Marcus was already ahead of them. Get ready, Holt muttered, already drawing his weapon. But before they could react, the door of the SUV opened, and two more armed men stepped out. They were closing in from both sides. There was no way out this time. Clayton's mind raced. They had to do something. I've got an idea, he said, his voice steady despite the rush of panic. We split up. Janelle looked at him, unsure. Are you crazy? It's the only way, Clayton said. We'll confuse them. Go left. Take the alley by the market. I'll draw them toward me. Holt, you're with Janelle. Without waiting for a response, Clayton took off, running in the opposite direction, hoping to lure the men away from Janelle and Holt. He could hear the sound of footsteps behind him, but he didn't look back. His breathing was labored, and the pain in his side made each step feel like a battle. But he couldn't afford to stop. Not now. The sound of gunshots rang out behind him as the men fired, but Clayton didn't slow down. He needed to draw them further away from the others. He turned another corner, finding himself in a wider street. A car was parked nearby, and he dashed toward it, ducking behind it to catch his breath. Meanwhile, Holt and Janelle had managed to slip down a side street and were running as fast as they could. They had a plan to meet up at a nearby safe house, but everything hinged on getting away from their pursuers. Stay low, Holt said, keeping an eye on the street ahead. We're not clear yet. Janelle nodded, but her thoughts were on Clayton. She hoped he was all right. As they rounded a corner, they could see the safe house in the distance. They were close, but they could hear the sound of footsteps echoing in the alley behind them. They're coming, Janelle said, her voice tight with fear. Holt didn't hesitate. We'll make it. They kept running, pushing forward with everything they had left. The door to the safe house was in sight, but just as they reached it, a car screeched to a halt nearby, blocking their path. Get down, Holt shouted, pulling Janelle behind a nearby dumpster. The car doors opened, and several men emerged, weapons raised. The ambush was closing in. Back in the street, Clayton had heard the gunshots behind him and knew they were closing in on Janelle and Holt. He needed to get back to them. He couldn't let them get trapped. But his wound was slowing him down. His vision blurred, and every step felt heavier. He couldn't keep running much longer. Clayton's pulse raced as he moved through the shadows, the pain in his side growing worse with each step. The sound of footsteps behind him was a constant reminder that Marcus's men were closing in, but he couldn't stop. Not yet. Not when Janelle and Holt were still in danger. Ahead, a flicker of movement caught his eye. Janelle and Holt were backed into an alley, cornered by Marcus's men. Clayton's stomach twisted. They had no way out. Damn it, he muttered, ducking into a doorway to watch. The black SUV was parked at the far end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Several men stood around, their guns raised, blocking the escape route. We don't have time, Holt's voice rang out, desperation in his tone. We need to fight back. Just hold on, Janelle snapped, her eyes darting to the end of the alley. We're not giving up. Clayton gritted his teeth. He couldn't let them fight this alone. He needed a plan. Fast. He spotted a metal trash can nearby. Without thinking, he grabbed it and hurled it down the alley with a loud crash. The men turned, distracted for just a moment. "Go!" Clayton shouted, rushing from his hiding spot. He burst into the alley, gun drawn. The surprise of his appearance gave him a split-second advantage, and he fired, knocking one of Marcus's men off his feet. Janelle and Holt didn't hesitate. They darted toward the safe house door, just a few yards away. Clayton kept his gun raised, taking down another man as the others scrambled to react. "Get inside!" Clayton shouted, his voice urgent. The door was so close. They were almost there. Gunfire erupted again, and Clayton ducked behind a stack of crates. His head was spinning from the exertion, but he couldn't stop. Not when they were so close to safety. Another shot rang out, grazing his shoulder. He winced but kept moving, firing back at the advancing men. The alley was quickly turning into a war zone. "Move it!" Clayton yelled, seeing Janelle and Holt nearing the door. With one last burst of strength, he fired at another attacker, sending him to the ground. The gunman hesitated, momentarily thrown off balance, giving Janelle and Holt the window they needed. They reached the door, sliding inside, just as Clayton followed, stumbling over the threshold. The door slammed shut behind them with a heavy thud, and the sound of gunfire faded. Clayton collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. Blood dripped from his shoulder, but he couldn't afford to focus on the pain. Not yet. "We made it," Janelle said, her voice a mixture of relief and disbelief. Clayton barely nodded, his vision blurring. He could feel the warmth of his own blood soaking through his shirt. His head swam, but he fought to stay conscious. "We're not safe yet?" he rasped. "This isn't over." Clayton's eyes flickered open, the world around him spinning. Pain radiated from his side, but he could still hear Janelle and Holt, their voices filled with concern. "Stay with us, Clayton." Janelle's voice sounded faint, but she was right there, her hands pressing against his wound. "I'm not done yet," Clayton muttered, his voice weak. Holt's voice cut through the haze. "You better not be. We're not losing you now." Clayton managed a strained smile. "I'm not going anywhere, but we can't run anymore. We finished this." Janelle nodded, her face set in determination. "We will, but first you need to rest. We can't do anything if you pass out." Clayton shook his head. "I'll survive, but Marcus won't. We're taking him down. We don't run anymore." Holt stepped closer, resolute. "We have the resources. We'll hit him where it hurts." Clayton's eyes hardened with resolve. "No more hiding. We hit him fast. It ends now." Janelle opened the door, glancing into the dark street. "We're with you. Let's finish this." Clayton pushed himself to his feet, taking the gun from Holt's hand. "Let's end it." They moved out into the night, the weight of the fight ahead pressing on them. They were done running. They had a plan. They had hope. And together, they would make sure Marcus wouldn't escape this time.